Hello and good evening. Thank you so much for joining me tonight for our workshop on the one, the only, the thesis statement. My name is Professor Hannah Khan, and I am so excited to have you all joining me this evening to talk about this very important topic. Because if you haven't noticed yet, I'm sure you will in your education that thesis statements are really important to the development of our writing, our papers, our thought processes as we go through the research process and the writing process. And so I'm really happy to have you all joining here this evening. If you're able to, I would love for you to have your camera on. That just continues to build a sense of community and camaraderie. If you're at work or driving home, I completely understand, no pressure, but if you are able to, I would love for this to just be a great community of learning in which we all share and learn together. So with that, I will begin the workshop with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you for this opportunity to meet and gather together to talk about thesis statements. I pray, Lord, that you would just bless our conversation. I just invite you into this workshop, Lord. I pray that you would guide and direct our steps. And I pray, Lord, that students would get their questions answered and that they would just have increased confidence moving forward with writing and working on their thesis statements. And we love you and thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay. So we are going to do a little bit of a warm-up discussion when we think about planning a vacation. It's currently summertime. A lot of us go on some sort of vacation at some point during the summer, or maybe even a staycation, just being able to take a few days off and relax. But when it comes to planning a vacation, ask yourself, would you just drive down random roads, hope you eventually get somewhere? Oh, sorry, the H and the W there are switched somewhere, and stop wherever looks interesting. Is that your plan when it comes to planning a vacation? No, I see everybody shaking their heads. No, that is absolutely not our plan when it comes to vacation. Instead, you would create a plan. You would know where you're going, how you're going to get there, when you're going to go, what you're going to see when you get to those different destinations. And what I'd like to talk about this evening is that your essay deserves the same amount of planning that you put into planning a vacation, planning a road trip. So, in today's thesis statement workshop, we are going to define what a thesis is and is not. We are going to understand the purpose, placement, and function of a thesis. We are going to work on building strong, clear, and effective thesis statements. And we are also going to practice and apply what we've learned. And also throughout this workshop, feel free to raise your hand and ask questions. I want this to be really practical and useful for you. And so if you have a question, more likely than not, someone else in the workshop or watching the workshop recording afterwards probably has the same question. So please feel free to jump in if you have a question. So if you haven't noticed, based on my PowerPoint slides, we're focusing on the thesis statement as a roadmap. And so we're kind of thinking through like a road trip. So if we're thinking about like a paper being a road trip, our thesis statement is the road map because it provides direction of where we're going and how we're going to get there. And so if we continue with this extended metaphor, we can think about destinations on the road trip as our body paragraph. So this is where we stop, we spend some time. Within those destinations, there are tourist attractions, and so that those are going to be our evidence and our examples. And so in our body paragraphs, we need to make sure that we are providing evidence through research, through logical reasoning, examples of how our claims play out. And then we also need roads. So we need to have transitions in between connecting our different ideas. And then we also want to have a safe return in which we come back, we have our conclusion, but we also come to this conclusion changed because of what we've gone through on the road trip or what we've read through in the paper. So when we think about the thesis statement functions as a backbone, a blueprint, and a roadmap. And what I mean by that is a thesis statement provides structure for the entire paper in the same way that the spine supports the body. We really need to think of the thesis statement as so foundational to the rest of our paper. Similarly, it functions as a blueprint. And so it shows us the different components, the different parts of a paper, and how those different parts fit together into a unified whole. And then one of my personal favorite comparisons is thinking of the thesis as a roadmap. And I use this visual quite frequently in the classes that I teach here at LBC. And what I love about this visual is that when we are going through our road trip, so we're going through our thesis, it provides a preview of the different destinations of our paper. So if each push pin is a destination that we're going to, it's a body paragraph. The thesis statement tells the reader, okay, this is where we're going to go. And then in the body paragraphs is where we actually really dive into the content of those different supporting points from our thesis statement. And we're going to look at actually a few different examples of that this evening. So, what is a thesis statement? A thesis statement presents your topic, your claim, and the supporting points of that claim. So, when we think about the thesis, it's not just a topic. It needs to be a debatable claim that someone could reasonably disagree with you about. And there needs to be clear pieces of supporting evidence to support that claim so that it's abundantly clear exactly where you are going on your road trip, where you are going in the paper. Any questions so far? Okay, great. So we want to kind of dig even deeper, define some terms here. So what is a topic? A topic could be something like social media. Now, we can't just write social media and that be our thesis statement. That is not a thesis statement. It's a topic, and it's a good topic. It's a relevant topic because there is, social media is there's a lot happening. Young people in particular are very influenced by social media, oftentimes growing up. And so parents and teachers and pastors and youth group leaders are all thinking about the impacts of social media on teenagers and adolescents. Now, a fact is also not a thesis statement. A fact would be millions of people use social media every day. That is not a thesis statement because that's just a fact. It's not debatable. You might use it as supporting evidence in your paragraph to show about the widespread use of social media, but it is not sufficient as a thesis statement. A thesis statement about this topic of social media could be, due to social media's negative impact on mental health, socialization, and self-image, legislation should be enacted to preclude anyone under the age of 18 from having a social media account. So here we are writing, this writer is writing on the topic of social media, but we're making a really clear claim that legislation should be enacted to preclude, prevent, prohibit anyone under the age of 18 from having a social media account. That's a debatable claim. Some people would have some really strong reactions to that because some people feel very strongly opposed. Some people believe that kids as young as 13 or even younger should be allowed to have social media accounts. And this thesis also has specific pieces of supporting evidence to support the claim. Social media's negative impact on mental health, that's supporting point 1. Negative impact on socialization, that would be point 2. And negative impact on self-image would be point number 3. And so, based on this thesis statement, readers have a really clear idea of where the paper is developing and progressing. So we know that based on this thesis statement, the first body paragraph is likely going to unpack, social media's negative impact on mental health. So that's going to be body paragraph number 1. And then the second body paragraph will talk about its negative impact on socialization. And I think you probably see where I'm going here. Then the third body paragraph would be about its negative impact on self-image. Now, I will say, and we'll talk about this at a few different points tonight, depending on the length of your paper, depending on the word count or the page count, each individual piece of support could be unpacked over multiple body paragraphs. And so for those of you who are in our LAN 101 course, where you're writing an argumentative essay that's at least 8 pages, you would develop your supporting points over multiple body paragraphs. But for those of you who are in LAN 100, where you're working on the expository essay and you're exploring a topic, you're probably going to be writing closer to 3 body paragraphs. And then with your introduction and conclusion, it would be what we think of as the traditional 5-paragraph essay. But again, even with LAN 100, sometimes students will write multiple body paragraphs for one piece of evidence, and that's totally fine. But my point there is that depending on the level of depth that a particular assignment requires, you may or may not have to develop each and every supporting point into multiple body paragraphs. So continuing in our conversation of what a thesis statement is, what it does. A thesis is a claim that takes a debatable stand on an issue. It's not a description, a summary, or just a statement of a topic. It can and should be revised as you further refine your evidence and your arguments. So in the initial stages of the writing process, you will come up with what we like to call a working thesis statement. So that's like your thesis statement rough draft, where it's like, okay, I know this is the topic that I want to write on. This is the general claim that I want to make. And these are my reasons for that claim. But perhaps as you engage in research in the LBC library or think through different aspects of your topic, you might realize, actually, my first supporting point isn't all that strong. I'm going to swap it out with a different point. And that is totally fine. That is part of the writing process. New evidence often requires you to change your thesis. You might realize, oh, I thought this, but then the research actually points to something else. And so don't feel like the first thesis statement that you write that you're married to it. You can take time to revise, refine, and edit that thesis. And the thesis statement gives your paper a unified structure and point, because returning back to our initial conversation at the start of the workshop, if you don't have a sense of direction of where you're going, it is really hard to know how to develop a paper. I'm sure many of us, myself included, have experienced writing a paper and you're not quite sure where you're going and you're trying to get to the word count, get to the page count, but it's not really going super well. More likely than not, that's an instance where we want to go back and revisit our thesis statement. Do I have enough content to say based on the thesis statement that I have written? And so if you're having those struggles with writing and generating content, you really want to reconsider going back to your thesis, reevaluating that and considering perhaps I need to change my supporting evidence, perhaps I need to change my claim, or add additional detail. So in your thesis, you want to make sure that you present an argument, a stance, or a claim. And you can ask yourself, can my audience argue with this? Could someone reasonably disagree with me on this stance or argue something to the contrary? If the answer is yes, then that's a good indication that your thesis is debatable. We also want to make sure that in our thesis statements, we're providing a key to the organization of our paper. We can ask ourselves, can I construct body paragraphs that support this? And we want to make sure that we can, because it can be easy to have ideas when we're free writing and planning, but then when we actually go to write it, it's like, oh, actually, maybe this is just a piece of supporting evidence, but maybe it's not the main idea of that body paragraph. We also want to make sure that we present the thesis at the end of the introduction. So we don't want to leave the reader guessing. We don't want to try to shield what we're writing about so that the reader is wondering and curious about what it is we're trying to say. We want to make it abundantly clear what it is we're writing about, what we're saying, and of course in a gracious, loving, humble manner, but we still want to make it clear and we still want to make it evident and assertive. And by placing the thesis at the end of the introduction, you have an opportunity to introduce your topic, the background on your topic, define any terms, provide historical context perhaps on your issue, or just current context on your issue, and then move into the thesis itself so that it's really clear what the paper's about, where you're going, how you're going to get there. And then in our thesis, we also want to make sure that we are presenting an argument that can be supported by reputable research. Is our argument logical? So we don't want to just write on something that is completely just opinion based. Of course, there's going to be differences in interpretation, but we want to make sure that we can actually support our research with, or excuse me, support our claim with solid research. So these are some guidelines to follow in our thesis statements. So now here are a few things we want to avoid in thesis statements. We want to avoid announcements such as this paper will discuss or this will be shown in this essay. It can be a little bit wordy, and a lot of professors just prefer students to just jump in and state the claim, the evidence, and go from there. We want to avoid just stating a fact, like some high school seniors decide to take a gap year. That's true, but if you wanted to write about it in your thesis, you would want to talk about perhaps the benefits of taking a gap year, and provide specific reasonings for why you think taking a gap year is beneficial for recent high school graduates. Or perhaps the opposite. Maybe you believe a gap year is not helpful and that high school graduates should either go right into working or right into schooling. We also want to avoid overly broad or generalized statements like kids of this generation are lazy. Well, that's not really a helpful thesis statement because you're not going to provide research to be able to back that up. We don't want to just have an overly broad, generalized statement. We want to make a specific, debatable claim that can be backed with scholarly research. As we were talking about just a moment ago, we also want to avoid forcing the reader to guess what the paper will prove or discuss. We don't want to hide that from the reader. We want to make it abundantly clear what it is we're arguing and how we're going to prove it. We also want to avoid asking questions in our thesis statement. And I want to make this part really clear because in the research process, we should be asking questions. So we want to be asking research inquiry questions on the the nature of our topic. So most papers begin with some sort of question of what are the impacts of social media on teenagers? That's an interesting question. And then your research process will show you more of that. And then your thesis statement should ideally be answering a question. So we want to make sure that we're answering questions in our thesis statement and not asking questions. But we should be asking questions as we're narrowing down our topic, figuring out what it is we want to write about, what it is we're trying to prove. But a thesis statement is a statement for a reason, it's not a question. Okay, so a few other things to avoid. We want to avoid being too broad in our thesis statement. An example would be education is important. Well, you can make that argument, but why is it important? How is it important? In what specific ways is it important? How does it impact cognitive functioning? How does it impact job preparedness or uh, the ability to apply to particular jobs? We want to make sure that we're really specific in our thesis statement because a thesis statement that's too broad is difficult for the writer to write because there's so many different directions that you could go in with that thesis. And it's also confusing for the reader because the writer's probably going all over the place. So we don't want to have anything that's too broad. Similarly, we also don't want to have anything that's too narrow. Students at one college prefer online quizzes. Well, that's really, really specific. And that's not really, I mean, someone could debate preference, but I think you see where I'm going with this. It's just too narrow, it's too specific. We also want to avoid being too vague. We want to avoid being too vague. Um, for example, if someone were to argue there are many issues in healthcare, well, what is the writer referring to specifically? Are they talking about healthcare management, healthcare training, issues with health insurance? What specifically is that writer wanting to address? It's unclear right now because the thesis is way too vague. So we want to specify the claim and then also include supporting evidence for that claim. We also want to avoid thesis statements that are a little too obvious. So, exercise is good for people. Yes, it is. Now, if someone did want to write on this topic, they could talk about the specific benefits of exercise, including cardiovascular health, metabolic function, muscle development. You could talk about these very specific, scientifically proven benefits or even benefits to specific types of exercise. So, why is running or swimming or walking particularly beneficial? What are the benefits of that particular type of exercise? That could be a way to specify and narrow down the focus of the research even more so. So now that we've talked about some things to avoid, we can now talk about, okay, so how do I actually go about constructing a thesis statement? So we want to select a topic that we're interested in. So in a lot of the courses at LBC, particularly in LAN 100 and LAN 101, students have freedom to select a topic that they're interested in. And so I really encourage students to choose something that you want to know more about, that you already maybe have knowledge in, but you want to know more, that is relevant to perhaps your job or the job that you're seeking to, or the field that you're wanting to go into. Maybe it's a theological topic that you've always had questions about. The the options are almost endless, but I really encourage students to choose something that they're interested in, because when we're interested in what we're writing about, it makes the writing process much more enjoyable. And so I'd recommend finding a topic that you're interested in and that you also have questions about. So once you've found your topic and you're asking questions about it, that's going to help lead to your claim. So your stance on that particular topic. So what specifically do you want to prove about that topic? And then through thinking about the topic, through research, you can come up with your supporting reasons to prove your claim. And so when we think about actually constructing a thesis statement, I want to lead with the important caveat that thesis statements can take a variety of forms. This is not a one size fits all. This is just one option that is available to you, but it is one option amongst many. But I think sometimes students really find it helpful to have just like a general structure, and then from there you can make it your own and kind of decide how you want to formulate it. So one possible thesis statement structure goes like this. And this is particularly helpful, I will say, for LAN 101, where you're writing an argumentative essay. But you could also use this in LAN 100 as well. So a writer would begin with although, and then include the counter argument. They would then follow that with their topic, their claim, and then their reasons of support. Because reason A, reason B, reason C. Now, right now, it's like, okay, that's a structure. Can we see it in action? Yes, absolutely. And actually, we're gonna return to this slide. Okay, I apologize. My example is actually a little bit further down. Okay, here is the example for that structure that we just looked at. So, although many students view the ability to choose their school clothing as a necessary personal freedom, school uniforms should be required in all public schools because doing so will reduce gang activity, alleviate students' anxiety around clothing and socioeconomic differences, and decrease instances of bullying. So we begin with the counter argument, the opposing view of this topic. So our topic is school uniforms. And if we're writing about that school uniforms should be required in public schools, well, the counter argument would be that school uniforms should not be required in public schools. So the counter argument is that although many students view the ability to choose their school clothing as a necessary personal freedom, and many students do feel this way, but the writer is saying ultimately school uniforms should be required in all public schools because reason one, reason two, reason three. So you can kind of see that progression happening in this thesis statement. Any questions about what we've talked about so far? The formula, possible formula, this example. Okay, all right. Well, then I'm going to jump back actually to the slide that we were going to look at. And the reason I'm doing this is because when talking about thesis statements, it's really important to also talk about the flow progression of a paper in general. So when we are writing a thesis-driven paper, we have our introduction and we include our thesis at the end of that introduction. We talked about that briefly earlier. And then the body paragraph number one supports the idea, number one, from the thesis. So whatever supporting idea you present first in your thesis is what you will unpack in your first body paragraph. And again, as we talked about earlier, depending on the length of your paper, you may unpack that point over multiple body paragraphs. This example essay flow is operating based on like a 5-paragraph essay flow. So adapt as necessary depending on your particular assignment. Body paragraph 2 would support idea number 2 from the thesis. So the second supporting idea from the thesis would be unpacked, explained, and supported in body paragraph number 2. And then similarly, body paragraph number 3 would support, unpack, explain, provide evidence for that third supporting idea from the thesis. And then the conclusion reinforces the thesis and explains the significance of the argument. As we talked about with our road trip analogy, it's returning home, but returning home changed because of the journey that you've taken up to this point. So again, as I've referenced a few times throughout the workshop, depending on the length requirement of the paper, you may develop each supporting idea in multiple body paragraphs. It just depends on the particular assignment in that course. So here is the general essay flow, and that is how the thesis statement impacts the essay organization. Okay, so here's another example that we'll look at. Now you'll notice in this example, we don't have the counter argument. And that's okay. The counter argument doesn't have to appear in the thesis statement. Now, for the flip-flop essays and the argumentative essay in LAN 101, you will include a counter argument in your paper. So make no mistake, the counter argument will be included in the paper, but it doesn't necessarily have to make an appearance in the thesis statement. With that being said, this example that we're looking at here is higher education is a worthwhile investment because earning a college degree increases career opportunities, improves critical thinking skills, and promotes long-term financial stability. So here I've broken down, the topic is in bold. So the topic is higher education, earning a college degree. The claim is that higher education is a worthwhile investment because the supporting evidence, we have reason one, reason two, and reason three. So when we break it down in this kind of structure, this kind of formula, it helps us just have a general idea of, okay, yes, this is what I'm writing about. This is what I am saying. This is my claim, and this is where I'm going and how I'm going to get there. So, continuing with this example, when we apply what we've learned of, okay, this is the essay flow based on the thesis, we know that each body paragraph, my apologies, my home phone started to ring. We know that each body paragraph should focus on one part of the thesis, should focus on unpacking, supporting, proving one part of the thesis. And it should directly support the overall argument. So we don't want to just include a body paragraph that is generally related to our topic. We want to make sure that it is intentionally building, supporting the thesis. With that, if we return to the thesis statement we were just looking at, we know that based on the thesis, we know the order of our body paragraphs. So, higher education is a worthwhile investment because earning a college degree increases career opportunities. That would be body paragraph number one. Improves critical thinking skills. That would be unpacked and supported in body paragraph two. And promotes long-term financial stability. That would be unpacked, explained, and supported in body paragraph number three. So when you have a strong, clear thesis statement, it helps the outlining and organization process tremendously because you know where you're going and how you're going to get there. So we know, okay, this writer is going to be talking about how college degrees increase career opportunities, and they're going to include evidence, logical argumentation, and clear support for that part of the claim in that paragraph. Similarly, how earning a college degree improves critical thinking, that would be unpacked in body paragraph number two. And then finally, in body paragraph number three, would unpack how earning a college degree promotes long-term financial stability. Having these clear delineations in the focus of each body paragraph really helps you as the writer plan and organize, because it can be really easy that as we're thinking through our topic and the benefits and all of the benefits of earning a college degree, it can be really easy when we're initially thinking about it to note how maybe talk in the career opportunities paragraph about financial stability. But we can kind of catch ourselves and realize, oh, actually, I talk about that in a whole separate paragraph. So I'm going to save that information and just present it in the third body paragraph. So it can help you maintain strong organization. Of course, we want to have transitions and we want to connect our ideas in our paper, but we want to make it really clear the main idea of each and every body paragraph and how it supports our thesis. So returning to the other thesis statement example that we looked at earlier, the one about school uniforms, I would like to ask you all, based on this thesis statement, what would be the order of the body paragraphs in this essay? So based on this thesis, what would the writer address in body paragraph number one? Yeah, Sabrina.
Okay, I'm sorry. Reducing gang activity.
Yes, excellent. Yep, that is the first supporting point in the thesis statement, and therefore it'll be unpacked in body paragraph number one. Very nice. Okay, what would be explained and unpacked in the next body paragraph?
Students' anxiety.
Yes, yep, how school uniforms would alleviate students' anxiety. Yeah, very good. Thank you. And then what would be unpacked in body paragraph number three?
How it would decrease instances of bullying.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Yes, you got it. Nice work, everybody. Yes, so we can see how having a clearly structured thesis statement translates to ease in outlining, ease in knowing where the essay is going and what points we're going to support where. Very nice. So with that, I want to dive a little bit deeper into essay organization as a whole because it's really hard, I would argue basically impossible to talk about thesis statements just in a vacuum because the thesis statement provides the sense of direction for the rest of the paper. And so it's really helpful to just kind of briefly look at, okay, how do we actually structure our papers and what goes in which paragraph? So this is just kind of going to be an overview of essay structure and how the thesis relates to that. So in our introduction paragraph, our introduction appears as the first paragraph in our essay, and its purpose is to introduce the topic and also the thesis. So generally, we're going to start with a hook, some sort of attention grabber for our reader. Now, I think a lot of people put pressure on themselves when writing the hook. Don't don't put too much pressure on yourself. It doesn't have to be sensational. It doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be the best sentence in your entire essay. It just should be engaging and it should pique your reader's interest. It should be just something interesting to kind of gain their attention. And then from there, you go into the background information and context. What should the reader know in order to understand your topic? Because you understand your topic well, you've been thinking about it, researching, carefully thinking through it for a long time by the point of writing the paper. But your reader might not be as familiar with your topic. And so, what background information should your reader know before going into your paper? And then we also want to make sure that we're transitioning to the argument. So we don't want to just kind of include some information and then tack our thesis on at the end. We want to make sure that there's a smooth transition into the claim of our argument. And the reason this upside down triangle is on our slide is because I think it provides a really nice visual of what an introduction paragraph really does. So I like to think of the introduction as drawing the reader in from the outside world. So your reader sits down to read your paper, and he or she is just coming from their world. So it's that the long line because it's like the outside world, but then you are bringing them into the specifics of your argument in your paper. So how can you engage them in such a way that they understand your topic, the specifics of your topic, and then the specifics of your argument? So I really like the visual of the upside down triangle where you're bringing them in from the outside world into the specifics of your paper. And as the writer, you are the one guiding your reader through the paper. So, as the guide, what does the reader need to know in order to be able to travel through the road trip of your paper, if you will? So after the introduction, after we've presented our thesis statement and made it abundantly clear our topic, our claim, and the supporting evidence for that claim, we then jump into our body paragraphs. And the purpose of our body paragraphs are to support and build up the thesis with explanation, research, and examples. So the body paragraphs are, as we talked about earlier, those destinations on the road trip. And then your evidence and your examples are like the tourist attractions at those particular destinations. So you want to make it really clear in your topic sentence. Your topic sentence is the first sentence of your body paragraph. And so each body paragraph has a topic sentence. And that presents the main idea of your body paragraph. And that main idea, hint, hint, is that element, that supporting point from your thesis. So that's how the topic sentence then directly connects to your thesis, because you're unpacking one piece of supporting, like a supporting reason from your thesis statement. You provide evidence and examples. So this is where you're factoring in your research, your scholarly support. You're providing examples, logical argument to support your main idea, which then directly supports the thesis. And then you're also going to explain. You want to make sure that you are connecting the dots for your reader and not just assuming that your evidence is self-explanatory. It can be tempting to find a really great quote from one of your sources and be like, oh, that says all it needs to say and I can move on. False. You have to actually go in and explain the quote, explain how it supports your main idea, unpack it for your reader so that it is so clear how that evidence supports your main idea and that main idea supports your thesis. And then we want to wrap up our body paragraphs in a satisfying way in which we are returning and noting how all of this supports that main idea from the topic sentence. So as a reminder, you'll have the number of body paragraphs will be dictated by the length of the assignment. So again, an 8-page paper will have many more body paragraphs than a 3-page paper. So it just depends on the length, the word count, and that also helps you plan accordingly. It helps you plan how much research you need, how much scholarly support, how much you need to unpack each supporting point, because again, if each supporting point from the thesis is going to be multiple body paragraphs, like it is in the LAN 101 argumentative essay, then it's going to take some time to really think through and plan out those paragraphs. Whereas in a shorter paper, it still takes time, it still takes planning and effort, but maybe not quite as much because it's a shorter paper. So then moving into the conclusion, so after you've presented as many body paragraphs as your paper calls for, you then go into your conclusion. And the purpose of the conclusion is to wrap up your paper in a satisfactory way, a satisfying way. So we want to make sure that we are synthesizing our thesis. And so we don't want to cut and paste. We don't want to just copy our thesis from our introduction and put it right into our conclusion. We want to kind of summarize and synthesize what our thesis said now that the reader has gone through the entirety of the paper. So what is the heartbeat of your argument that you have ideally, hopefully, proven at this point in the paper? The conclusion is going to answer the question of, so what? What is the significance of this topic, of this argument to the reader. And this also depends a little, or in large part, on the audience. So, is your paper writing to Christians living in the United States? Is your paper writing to parents raising children in the 21st century? Is your paper writing to um, those who drive cars to work or those who take public transportation to work? Um, Depending on your audience, that is going to shape a lot of your thesis, your argumentation, and that's absolutely going to shape your conclusion. Are there any calls to action that your reader should take? So, based on reading your essay, should your audience do something? Should their beliefs change in some way? Should there be more research conducted on a particular topic? Should churches think differently about this topic? This is your opportunity to really apply and show the significance of what it is you've argued and unpacked in your paper. Which connects to the next point on the slide. This is where you're providing practical implications and applications of your argument. So, um, you know, this isn't, we don't want to just think, okay, this paper, like I'm writing this paper because I have to for my class. We really want to think beyond that of each topic that you choose is important. It has real world significance. And so what is that significance? And so we want to unpack that in the conclusion. Oh, and returning back to the triangle image, the conclusion is like a right side up triangle where you're taking your reader from the specifics of your paper back out into the world, which connects to everything that we were just talking about of what is the real world application of what you've presented in your paper. Okay, so in our thesis statements, in our college writing in general, we want to maintain academic style. So we want to use objective academic language. So we want to avoid using personal pronouns. I, me, my. We don't want to say, I think this. We just want to take that out. We also want to avoid second person pronouns like you, your, yours. We don't want to directly address the reader because it can feel a little bit intense. We don't want to say, you should do this, you should do that. It comes across just a little bit intense. So we just want to note how we want to write in third person where we're saying people should do this, Christians should do this, parents should do this. Whoever your audience is, that's you can kind of shape that call to action if you have one in your conclusion to that particular audience. And we really want to make clarity our primary goal. So we want to be clear in what it is we're articulating. We just want to be concise and direct and also gracious and kind. We want to love our neighbors through our writing and always in everything that we say or do glorify God. So we want to make sure that we're doing that in our writing, in our speech, and in our conduct. And then we also want to make sure that we're using proper spelling, grammar, and punctuation in the thesis statement, and then of course also throughout the paper as well. Okay, we actually looked at this slide earlier. Okay, when in doubt, check the syllabus. The syllabus provides descriptions for major assignments and details regarding the grading scale and weight. So this is really important, especially for those major projects, major assignments in the course. If you're wondering the specifics of the assignment, of course, you can look in the assignment section in Canvas where you actually go and look at that assignment, but you can also check the syllabus as well. As we've talked about throughout this workshop, the page length tells you something really important about the paper as a whole. So again, an 8-page paper is going to require more body paragraphs, more research than a 3-page paper. So just keeping that in mind as you're going through the research, writing, and planning process. And I'd also just encourage you to reach out for help as soon as you have questions. So your professor is there to help you. The Ally Center is here to help you. So if you weren't previously familiar, the Ally Center offers writing services. So we, of course, offer these workshops. And then we also meet with students individually in one-on-one sessions to support them in writing. And so whether you're looking for support with topic selection, brainstorming, research, outlining, organizing, drafting, revising, editing. We are here to support you in that. So know that help is an Ally Center appointment away. We are here to support you. And then we also offer academic mentoring services, and that supports students in study strategies, goal setting, time management. If you're struggling to balance work, life, and schedules and routines, and you're really wanting to kind of brainstorm and make a plan for, okay, how am I going to get all of my schoolwork accomplished each and every week? We meet with students to help them plan out their calendars and their schedules. And so we are here to help you and equip you with time management skills and strategies to succeed in school. And then we also provide ESL services. And so if English is not your first language, we have an ESL specialist who is there to help you and support you in your education. And then another service that Ally provides is accessibility services. So if you have a short-term or long-term disability and are looking to get accommodations, we do have an accessibility services coordinator that you can meet with and talk through those topics with. Okay, so moving forward, as we close out our workshop this evening, I'd love to hear one item that you learned today that you intend to put into practice this subterm. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I keep forgetting to use the hand signal,
Oh,
but
no worries.
um, this was very helpful for me in terms of understanding what the thesis is asking, what the structure is, and what should be included and what should be avoided.
Excellent. Oh, awesome. I'm so glad to hear that. Wonderful. Any other takeaways or ways that you're going to implement items that we talked about tonight into your writing this term?
I like how the notes on just following the proper formats and structures of a paper from the intro to the body paragraphs with the thesis to the concluding paragraphs are just, for myself, just staying on course with the structure of the paper.
It's wonderful. It's great.
I'm going to, I really like the, good evening, everyone. I really like the thesis statement formula. In the past, when I've written, I just write off the top of my head what sounds good to me. But now that I've seen this formula, that makes sense that you want to have a structure so that it flows in a way that meets the level of writing that should be done where we are academically. So I really like the thesis statement formula.
Excellent. Yes. And we've all been there before with just kind of writing like, well, this is what I think and this is what I'm going with. So I totally understand.
I appreciated the do's and the don'ts of what should be in a thesis statement, specifically including a claim and the counter argument. That was actually very helpful as well.
Great. Thank you. Great. Any other takeaways that anyone would like to share? Well, I would just like to thank each and every one of you for joining tonight. I really enjoyed unpacking this topic with you and just hearing from you. So thank you so much. If there's anything that I can do, feel free to reach out. And I hope you have a blessed rest of your evening. All right. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.